So good morning, good evening. I am Charlotte Koo, professor of law at the Texas A&M University School of Law and past president of the Academic Council on the United Nations System. Welcome to the fifth plenary of the 2021 ACUNS annual meeting, a conversation about the Verified campaign with UN's Undersecretary General for Global Communications, Melissa Fleming. Ms. Fleming unfortunately could not be with us live today because of a sudden change in her schedule. She did, however, graciously record a conversation 2 days ago with ACUNS board member Sarmad before leaving on her journey. Before getting to that, I have some thanks and announcements. This is the third and last day of our annual meeting. Despite our virtual gathering, I do not think that our passion or interest in matters relating to the UN have suffered, as reflected in our rich exchanges and dialogue, and we will continue that today. We have, following this plenary, another plenary to mark another landmark for ACUNS, the 25th anniversary of its flagship journal, Global Governance. Indeed, the publisher of Global Governance, Brill Publishers, has graciously sponsored this conference and offered all participants in this conference free access to the journal. So we invite those who are not acquainted with global governance to please have a look at the journal. We will have a special session to note the work and legacy of Ed Luck, and we will have 4 book roundtables before we conclude our conference. So there's plenty more ahead of us, and certainly so much that has come before. And so please continue to participate and lend your thoughts and enthusiasm. All of this, our annual meeting, is in keeping with our mission, which has for more than 30 years been to unite scholars, practitioners, and others active in the work and study of the United Nations in order to better understand and address the most pressing global issues of our time. And my goodness, we've really got some global issues now, don't we? I hope you agree with me that this annual meeting is doing its part to advance that mission. And indeed, just as I got on, I was reminded that today is Charter Day, so a good day for us to reflect these things. As past president, I've had the privilege of working closely with ACUNS President Lise Howard over the past year, a year in which ACUNS has moved into a new institutional structure as an independent incorporated entity. Lise has led us through this transformation with grace, with vision, always with a keen eye to the future. As an organization, we are the better and stronger for her leadership. And I hope you will join me in thanking her for her tireless service to ACUNS. One of the data point of which is that today is in fact her birthday, and she is still working tirelessly behind the scenes for us and with us. Congratulations, Lise, and thank you. I've also had the pleasure to work with Lise and other members of the annual meeting team who have worked pretty much nonstop since the conference began, and indeed for some time before. We would not be here without our meeting team: Lise, Philip, Christine, Gabby, Nirvana, our web support Hassan, our tech host led so ably by Christina Petsu. Thank you for all of your dedicated and expert work, support, humor, and camaraderie. Finally, a word of thanks to all the participants, all of you, paper presenters, roundtable participants, chairs, discussants, and observers. Without you, there would be no reason to be here. Your enthusiastic presence, participation, and constructive contributions have made all the hard work worthwhile. And thank you all so much. Now to the announcements. It is my happy duty to announce the winner of our 2021 Dissertation Award, Dr. Hanna Birkenkirte, Humboldt University, Berlin, for her dissertation, A Concept at the Very Heart of the Organization's Mission, Unpacking the Rule of Law in the United Nations. Honorable mentions are awarded to Dr. Sam Onapa, University of New England, for his work dealing with estranged political relationships, a prerequisite for sustainable peace in South Sudan. Mrs. Laura Peitz, Hertie School, Berlin, for her work, Dual Nature of Multilateral Development Banks, Balancing Development and Financial Logics. Dr. Emma Saint, London School of Economics, for her work, Empowering Resistance, Revisionist States, and the Underlying Dynamics of Norm Diffusion. We congratulate our award winner and honorable mention designees. The Dissertation Award is an important part of ACUNS' mission to encourage and to recognize the work of new scholars. And we look forward to seeing our award winners with us for many years to come. Now to our program. Melissa Fleming has been UN Undersecretary General for Global Communications since September 2019. She came to New York following service as head of communications for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and as head of media and outreach for the International Atomic Energy Agency. She is author of the book, A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea, and host of the award-winning podcast, Awake at Night. Mr. Sarmad Khan is a member of the ACUNS Board of Directors, senior fellow at the Center for Global Affairs, New York University, and a seasoned UN hand himself, who posed questions gathered from the ACUNS board to Ms. Fleming for this conversation. One final thing. As you listen to the conversation, let me invite each member of the audience to reflect on how you might individually do your parts to foster and to promote responsible, constructive, and engaging communication about the UN, about multilateralism, and global issues, whether that be in the classroom, in the halls of government, corporations, NGOs, IGOs, civil society, or just as you go about the daily business of ordinary life. As the Undersecretary General so compellingly conveys, effective communication is essential as we navigate our global times, and we must each do our part. Not only does she make her case for effective communication and for the verified campaign to counter misinformation, but she also provides examples from her own experience of putting faces on numbers and on the sometimes rarefied, and putting faces on the sometimes rarefied and sterile proceedings of distant international organizations. I hope you enjoy the program.
Welcome to the fifth plenary session of the annual meeting of the Academic Council on the United Nations System, a conversation about UN Verified campaign. My name is Sarmad Khan. I'm a member of the ACUNS Board of Directors and Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Affairs at New York University. I'm joined by Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Head of Global Communications, Ms. Melissa Fleming. Might I also add author and sought-out speaker. On behalf of ACUNS, I extend our warm welcome and pleasure to have you here, Melissa, and the opportunity to speak with you today.
It's so great to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Melissa, you began your career as a journalist and now serve as the head of global communications for the United Nations. You oversee numerous platforms in multiple languages and large-scale communications and advocacy networks that reach millions of people across the world. You have a direct reporting line to the Secretary General. Can you describe a moment in your journey that had a significant impact on you, or was a turning point for you?
I think maybe a turning point was meeting refugees. I think that's when I really realized what the UN is there for, and that is really for the most vulnerable people on our earth, so that they are able to live in dignity and in safety and in peace. And it's these are kind of, concepts that we all believe in. They're wonderful words in the UN Charter or the UN Declaration on Human Rights. But when you actually meet somebody who has been forced from their home at gunpoint with just the clothes on their back and having lost everything that was dear to them, and then sitting in a place where basically the international organizations like UNHCR who are helping them have only enough funding for their survival, but not what really makes up the dignity of a human being. Maybe you're all familiar with Maslow's pyramid on human aspiration, and it's really those parts that make us whole and make us happy that are very often missing. So I guess it really was a turning point to say, okay, these are the people that the UN is working for. These are the people where there's just gaps. No government is taking care of them for various reasons, and the UN is there, taking the place of that, and also being their advocate. So this happens at so many levels. It happens with the humanitarians directly on the ground, and then at the political level in New York, where I now have the honor to be serving.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, indeed. I mean, at the country level and down with seeing the people and the strife and how they're coping and also overcoming those challenges, extremely inspiring, but also sobering. The Secretary General has recently been appointed, as you know, for a second term. Congratulations to Secretary General Guterres and to you and to the UN family. In his oath of office statement, he remarked, "We are writing our own history with the choices we make right now." What chapter can UN communicators contribute to this call for action?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in the biggest global crisis in our 75-year history, and that's really clear. COVID-19 is not just a global pandemic. It is a socio and economic crisis. It is a stability crisis. It is hitting every walk of society and every single country on earth. So the UN is really being challenged, not only to act and to be there, to roll out vaccines, to develop programs, to be the voice of the voiceless, but really to provide this kind of advocacy on, we can't go back to where we were before, because this is what got us into where we are now. And that's where I see communications coming in really, really strong. I mean, we've been advocating for the Sustainable Development Goals for a long time. And they came a long way and captured a lot of imagination, and countries were making progress. Even big businesses were taking them on. But what we've seen from COVID-19 is an exposure and an exacerbation of every single one of these goals, particularly in the areas of inequality and poverty, digital divide, all the way. Through crisis, you can rewrite the future. And I think this is what he's saying when he meant that we have a chance to write a new chapter that's not just kind of trudging forward, business as usual, putting out fires, but it's really everybody has recognized the world is not in a good place. We don't have the public health systems. We don't have the economic buffers for the people who are living hand to mouth. We don't have, for women and girls, the systems in place that will protect them and make sure that they remain in school. There's so many things that just need to be fixed and could be better. And we have the blueprint. And the same, I mean, just last point though, because I know he was referring to this too. With COVID-19, because it hit everybody and affected everybody, they realized, oops, something's wrong with the system. On climate, we're on the brink, right? But not everybody is really feeling that. So our communications advocacy is also extremely important in that area.
And speaking to that advocacy, I mean, the media landscape today offers positive opportunities, quite significant for wider reach, the depth of information that's available, multiple and diverse voices and perspectives, just to name a few. It's also a landscape that is cluttered and challenging to navigate to the truth of matters and to the crux of the issues. The UN initiative Verified took a bold step in setting a pathway to seeking authoritative scientific evidence around COVID-19 and getting the message out there in terms of what are the facts, what is the evidence, and what needs to be done. When did you realize that this initiative was needed? Mm-hmm. And can you walk us through the journey of its conception?
I think we realized it right away because I think we were already well aware that the media landscape is in this kind of social media world is polluted. It's really polluted with misinformation. We noticed it very much in the climate space, where the climate denial and conspiracies were making our lives very difficult when trying to convince governments to change their policies, because their publics were not necessarily believing in it. So what we had was a public health crisis that, if anybody knows anything about public health, the number one ingredient that you need is public trust. If you don't have public trust in the guidance that's being given, then everybody's going to be led astray. And to do this in an atmosphere where there's tons of fear, it's a novel virus, so the science is unfolding, and you have we predicted that certain leaders in certain countries might not be singing off the same song sheet. So it was clear to me that the UN needed to play a hugely central role with WHO and the United Nations Secretariat. So we were in not just a public health crisis, but a communications crisis. I also knew that we didn't really have the means in our own team to penetrate the internet the way that we would need to do. So we did launch this initiative last May, and the Secretary General announced it as we coined the name as verified, and he said, this is what we're going to do. We are going to flood the internet with science, solutions, and solidarity. And that's what we aim to do. And we partnered with a fantastic organization, company called Purpose. And they're really tried and tested campaigners and social movement mobilizers. I'd worked with them before at UNHCR. And we were able to also raise funds that allowed us to really produce the content, to identify where the data deficits were, where people were searching online. What do I do? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to do? And then where the misinformation was leading people astray, and to produce that kind of content, and to really that was not just because what we had was a PDF document that was 200 pages long, and on page 152 you might find that nugget of information. Well, nobody is going to search for that. They're in their feeds and Google searches, and we needed our clear guidance to pop up in their streams and to be front and center, and to say, this is what the United Nations is advising you to do. At the same time, we needed to fight misinformation, and maybe I could get into that a little bit later head on. But it was getting out this public health guidance and being in those spaces, and in multiple countries, in multiple languages. We partnered with major media organizations who also helped us to do traditional media things like TV ads and radio spots, and depending on the country and how people receive their information. So,
the ocean of information and evidence that continues to be generated and grow, and and for Verify to amplify that. How does it adapt?
It really is. It's like a never-ending kind of battle, because we knew this was coming too. We had the public guidance figure, pillar on public health information. We had a pillar on fighting misinformation. We knew we had to prepare for the coming of the vaccine, right? This is back in the spring and in the summer.
Right.
We knew that labs were busily working away on a COVID-19 vaccine. And nobody thought that the miracle of this vaccine would be ready as early as in November. But what we did predict was that the anti-vaccine community was preparing for that day. And they are very savvy. They use a lot of human stories. They have no problem with distorting science or the truth. And they know how to work the algorithms on the social media channels. So we had to be prepared with pre-bunking. We prepared a lot of pro-vaccine content where we were putting out content on the wonders of vaccines in general over time, reminding people that some of the worst diseases like smallpox were actually eradicated, that we don't have measles running rampant in this country, except in places where people refuse to get the vaccine. And these are horrific diseases. And we now, and then we did a lot on the science of vaccines, and we recruited in an initiative all kinds of lab scientists who were working on the vaccines in different countries around the world, and trained them on how to speak about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, and on TikTok. So it's amazing how they took off. They became TikTok stars. These scientists would, nobody knew them beyond their small communities, but they actually then started getting interviews on the national media and becoming quite famous. So this was also an initiative of Verified to kind of build this confidence when the vaccine came out. When it did come out, we're fighting a big misinformation, anti-vaccine battle to this day, and so we're continuing our work. We foresee, as this pandemic is still, we think we're speaking here in the United States, but there are parts of the world where it is surging. We're really worried about Africa. We're still worried about Latin America, parts of Asia. The vaccine is way out of reach for these countries. And so we're continuing to need to deploy our verified content in many parts of the world in a very robust way.
Also in India, where we saw the highest number of cases earlier this year, I think it was April, and UN Verified, and the UN team mobilized and verified campaign was almost, let's just say, accelerated with the UN team there, and it was, and that campaign is going on strong. But you spoke to trust, or the lack of trust as well, is really kind of the heart of the problem. But also getting the message out in many of the countries that are deeply affected. Also, I was delighted to hear. I turned on the radio yesterday, and I'm in Southern Ontario, and I heard the Verified campaign on the radio when we're talking about vaccinations. So I did almost an internal double take, and I was delighted to hear that. How could you build and maintain that public trust of UN information? The UN is very good at almost the successes are at times overlooked, even in the media and in the conscious that influences the conscious of many people. But also its achievements and what it's doing. How is it that we can continue to build that trust with the information that's being disseminated out there? Well,
the UN is very institutional, and it's really important that we break out of our castle walls. I make a lot of efforts to elevate the human beings who work at the UN, because people, while I think they have this kind of vision, view and vision, and from opinion polling, for the most part, it's quite positive about what the UN stands for, represents, what it does, not necessarily the Security Council, but other parts of the UN. So they are increasingly making a distinction. But it's really only the human beings and the human figures that will be able to really, deliver that sense of trust to others. And, that's why I think, the Secretary General's voice, we really rally to get him out there and to provide the platforms for him to speak so that people see, oh, this is the leader of the UN. But then there are so many other leaders of the UN. I started a podcast several years ago called Awake at Night, which now has 2.5 million downloads. And it's really surprising how popular it is. It's long form interviews with people working in the UN who have really devoted their lives to a better humanity, a better world. And many of whom are working on the front lines and have made many sacrifices, including to their own safety and certainly to their families. And I don't think that many people know that. And so these interviews are not about, X number of statistics or this policy or this. It's about their life story. And you really get a picture of that sense of purpose that my colleagues have of working for the cause and devoting your life to creating a better world. And a lot of people out there are attracted to that. They're really attracted to it. And we're seeing more and more interest in learning about the UN, learning how to get into the UN, working for the UN. So, I think that's one way of building public trust. But I think also, really strong communications, transparency, being in places where people are. I think social media has, some people can say it's a curse, but it can also be a real communications advantage. We're able to speak to people directly. I remember the times as a communications professional, my only way was really through journalists. We still work through journalists, really important, totally support the media, but now we can also communicate directly with people and we can have conversations with them, we can engage with them, we can respond to them. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think it's so important, the question. Trust is the center of everything. People have kind of lost trust, depending on the country they're in. They've lost trust in their governments or that things will get better. And I think we need to offer them that hope.
Melissa, I mean, to continue to offer that hope and that really comes out of the Awake at Night series, which I'm sure many of us have been awake at night listening to the Awake at Night series, and also delighted to see a few of my former bosses on there in conversation with you. But you mentioned social media as well. And there's much controversy around Twitter and Facebook, and many people come to conclusions from that misinformation that continues to be disseminated across those platforms. And there's also been discussion around, or ideas around, possible regulation of the social media platforms. What are your views on this, and what is the UN considering a viable pathway to regulation, or at least stemming that the scourge of misinformation?
No, I think on regulation, this is something that we are definitely studying, but haven't yet come to a conclusion on what our UN position necessarily would be. But in the meantime, we are working with the platforms. We have conversations with the platforms. We are trying ourselves to become as informed as possible about how their algorithms work, how misinformation is traveling. During COVID-19, we have absolutely had tough conversations and said, this is unacceptable. This is resulting in our WHO and UN content rising to the top of people's feeds, thanks to the platform's intervention. That is possible, that if people are clicking on something about COVID, all of a sudden you see WHO.
Mm.
They have taken measures. I mean, we started an initiative called Pause, Take Care Before You Share. It's a big global campaign that's still ongoing. We're relaunching it again in a couple of days. It is really a campaign to just get people to realize that, first of all, there's misinformation all over the place. Second of all, that they might be sharing something that's not true. And that if you just pause and look at a few things about it, you'll know. And it's really, we've got evidence that it's actually slowing misinformation. Very interestingly, Twitter and Facebook came to the same conclusion. And for example, if you're on Twitter and you see an article being posted and you don't click on it and read it, you'll get a window clicked as you're trying to share it from Twitter saying, "You didn't read that. Are you sure you want to share it?" Which is kind of like, oops, that's that. Yeah, and it really does slow you down and make you go back and read it. And Facebook followed suit and did the same thing. So these are the kinds of things we're doing. Is it enough? No. But it has to be a combination of enough public pressure so the platforms really take meaningful action. It's, their model is advertising, and it's the more attractive the content is in people's feeds, it's not based on accuracy. So until that changes, we're going to be in a battle where it's individual responsibility. It's asking the platforms to elevate science-based content, and us trying to do our best being an alternative source, and perhaps even a primary source of trusted information.
I'm reminded by that 100-year-old, probably 300-year-old adage: you cannot reason someone out of something they didn't reason themselves into. And it really kind of lends itself to mindsets and behaviors, and from there we see the impact and outcomes of that as well. So I think the pressure to get to almost right size information and flood all airways and pathways with that data, but also showing real people and demonstrating that those people can connect to and resonate with and feel comfortable with, to continue to speak to those facts and to that science. You mentioned climate action, and early this year, the Secretary General Guterres called for ambitious climate targets and asked member states to make net zero emissions the new normal. Climate action is central to the objectives of the UN this year in the Secretary General's agenda, and underscores, of course, the importance of climate neutrality and climate credibility. How will the UN Secretariat remain at the forefront of this effort?
I think this is one area where the UN has been at the forefront, and the associated organizations, UNFCCC, the UN Environment Program, and definitely the Secretary General. I think if he was known for anything in his first term, it was his advocacy on climate action. And it's also warnings about the shocking state of the planet and how we're on the brink. So I think, even Greta, she uses UN reports as her basis. So I think young people also recognize the centrality of the UN in creating the data and being the advocate for moving away from fossil fuels, like stopping coal plants, moving towards alternative sources of energy, and also the linkages between reducing carbon emissions, but also caring for our environment and biodiversity and food systems. So the UN is really at the center, because what you need is political action. you need the action at the level of the governments, and obviously the financial actors, the big those who finance fossil fuels, and those who could invest in helping countries get ready and also overcome, because climate change is happening now. Just a quick story. I was out west last week visiting my mother in the west in Nevada in the US, and it was 115 degrees for 8 days straight. And
Wow.
And in Death Valley, just a short jump away, it was 130 degrees. And there's still people who watch Fox News and who actually just think, oh, well, that happened in 1940. It was 115 for a couple of days, so this is cyclical. We need people to start feeling this is happening now and to really make change, because it is. And we're definitely on the brink. And so if you haven't felt the UN passion and for this and the urgency, I hope that we can get that out now. We're starting with also some external generous funding. We're going to be upgrading our communications advocacy in the lead up to COP. So we're hoping to be as kind of powerful as Verified also in the climate space.
And the Secretary General's Common Agenda as well. I mean, bringing in terms of galvanizing, the global community, particularly member states, but more importantly, all different actors from all different segments of society, and looking at these multidimensional issues as well is almost that more urgent call for consolidated action and multilateralism action in different ways and through different spheres of work. You mentioned earlier in this conversation about people and connecting with people as part of your turning point and understanding how they cope, their challenges, their suffering, but also hope. And during your time as head of UNHCR, head of communications at UNHCR, you wrote a book, A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea, that traces the journey and experiences of a Syrian refugee named Doha. Why did you choose to focus on this one story?
Thanks for that question, because it's, for me, this book and it was the proof that individual storytelling in the face of mass suffering is the way to move hearts and minds. So I first learned of Doa's story, reading the news in the morning, and I heard of this. Let me just get a sip of tea. It was a horrible shipwreck, and it was 2014. It was at the time where a lot of refugee boats were, sorry, something got caught in my throat. So it was the time when lots of refugee boats were crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and there were shipwrecks. And I just always thought, oh my God, these are flimsy boats and packed, but this one really captured my attention, because the news article said that they thought that 500 people had drowned, and that there were only 11 rescued, and among them was a young 19-year-old woman named Doa Al-Zamel. And when she was rescued, she had 2 little babies on her chest, not her own. And the more I flew down immediately, she was taken to the island of Crete to meet Doa, because I knew she came from Syria. I just thought, we need to know why, how this happened, what kind of story. And the more I learned about her story, the more it was clear that it was the story of thousands of Syrian refugees. And, so Doa had fled from Dara, which was the place where the origin of the Syrian conflict. She was, as a young, girl, she was witness to the protests. She went out with them. Then she started seeing the tanks roll into her town, and it was just too dangerous to stay. And she fled with her family, fell in love, met Bassem, and he convinced her to take this journey to Europe where they could have a new life. They wanted to study and to work. And these smugglers, they gave up their life savings for these smugglers on this ship. And in any case, her story, because she survived 4 days and 4 nights on a child's floating ring in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and the parents of these 2 little children had turned them over because they were drowning, and she had them on her chest for 4 days and 4 nights. Unfortunately, one of them didn't pull through after she was rescued, but it's a remarkable story of survival, and it has captured the attention of so many people around the world. And I'm going into the details of it because every time I tell the story, I first did it as a TED Talk, and every time people read it, including school children, because there's a young reader's edition, they are captivated by Doa's story. And it touches them in ways that no kind of like history book or news account about all of the hundreds of thousands of people or the millions of refugees would. And so I have evidence that this type of storytelling works. It is optioned to be made into a Hollywood movie by Steven Spielberg and J.J. Abrams. And they've also told me it is a true story, but it has all the elements of a Hollywood feature fiction film without not any detail of it being made up. So the thing is that there are so many refugee stories like this that have all of the elements of a Hollywood film. It is, you start with a kind of nice life, and then there's an evil somebody coming to threaten that life. You escape it, you overcome, and there is, there's sadness, there's romance, there's all kinds of things that human beings go through, and then you come through and you survive. And we need to tell these stories, and then that's where we build the bridge of empathy to other people. That's where we open people's hearts, and then that's where people say, okay, what can I do and how can I help?
Mm. And when I was just I'll say scene, if you will, but the experience of the other boat ramming Doha's boat, I mean, I could feel what was almost be there, what was going on, and the way you illustrated in the detail of that is so compelling that it takes you into that story.
You remember it. If I had told the story of a bunch of statistics, you would not remember it. So it's I
remember that.
Really, I'm saying this because if you have the responsibility of communicating on behalf of people whose voice is not being heard, on behalf of people who are going through the unspeakable tragedy and suffering, then you have a responsibility to do it in a way that is going to make people feel and feel compassion, and then also remember. And it's.
I mean, to borrow from what you've said before, it almost it puts the tears back on the numbers.
Yes.
And that's precisely the feeling one gets when they reads that story. And thank you for sharing that story and Doa's story with us in the world. I mean, you spoke about the Wake at Night podcast, and I wanted to just ask you to elaborate, if you could, on how you see the role of these UN leaders cultivating hope. through those stories. I mean, there's diverse yet connected stories and experiences of UN colleagues and beyond in those conversations. How do you see that resonating forward and continuing to inspire?
Well, I think that when people start to get to know the person through listening to the interview and kind of what their backstory is and what drove them to pursue this work that is relentless, that is often really traumatizing almost because of what you witness and the stories that you have to absorb, representing women who are raped or seeing a genocide or mass flight of people or children on the brink of starvation. I mean, these are things that are really hard to stomach, but that there's one thread throughout. It drives the colleagues that I interview at the UN to keep going and just to do everything that they can and to be there. And so I think it's a way to understand also parts of our world that are kind of inaccessible. It's not really about those parts of the world, but it's about the people who are working there and why they do it. And it's a profession that doesn't get much attention. I don't think that people, when they're studying, they realize, what it means to be a humanitarian worker or a peacekeeper so I think it's a way to understand that. And also there are stories of how the UN has so many stories, has been there at the right time and in the right place, has saved people, has lifted them up, has allowed them to carry on with their lives, to even do amazing things. So it can be very inspiring.
And through those stories, not only are they able to convey the issues that they're grappling with, the UN's grappling with, and more importantly, the people are grappling with in the context that they work in, but also translating complex policy and actions into messages for the people that the UN serves. What would be your advice on how we could collectively do that and translate not only policy but complex ideas, research, data that continues to be more accessible to the people?
I think all scientists, academics, doctors, everybody needs to learn how to communicate because it's a problem. We're seeing it with COVID that yes, we've seen. I used to work as the spokesperson for the International Atomic Energy Agency, and we had to communicate nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear safety. I had to do it. I knew nothing about anything nuclear. And I can tell you, but though, if I put the scientists in front of the TV camera, nobody would have understood a single thing. So I had to learn as much as I could, know more than the general public, but also translate this into language that people could understand. So I think the more, and I think, we do see examples of fantastic communicators in the health field. I think Dr. Fauci, for example, is one who is just down to earth, and he generates trust and he explains things simply. At WHO, there's the emergencies director, Dr. Mike Ryan. He's just salt of the earth, and he can just cut through and explain so clearly, but also impassioned with, so I think, it's being authentic, being yourself, being passionate about what you are doing and what you're believing, but learning a few tricks of communication so that you yourself, you don't need a translator, a person like me. You can do it yourself and get your work that you're so passionate about and that is so needed and necessary out to more people. I think professors, particularly in North America, because they're so scrutinized and judged and by students, and because it's these for-profit universities, have gotten really good at being really strong communicators and getting things across. So I think that should spread around the world. But it's a kind of, communications is often an afterthought, and it's what somebody else does. But I think it's for all of us to learn, strong public speaking, and get over fears of public speaking, and to just to communicate on some of the channels that we have now available to us, where you feel comfortable blogging, on social media, and really to be able to reach people with science, because that's just so important for the future of our world.
And you would see communications as that perch to elevate the science.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's really there. It's just often, the purveyors of disinformation, the ones who create information to lead people astray, they have no problem speaking in black and white terms. And so it is a big challenge because science is changing. Sometimes it's nuanced. Sometimes there are caveats. Sometimes scientists have to correct themselves. But we've also, the studies have shown that that's fine as long as you explain it and say, what we know today currently this has shifted because we have new information that is but it's become really important in the vaccine rollout. There is so much vaccine hesitancy. Some of it is historic, some of it is political, and a lot of it is fueled by misinformation. And those who seem to have the most influence are trusted figures in communities, whether they're doctors or religious leaders or even barbers. And we need to give them the tools to understand how to address people who are fearful and hesitant. People who are adamantly, no way ever, I'm going to ever take this. Forget it. Just don't even bother. But there is this, and it's in all areas. When I was working on refugees, we had this middle ground too. We called them the conflicted middle. They weren't really sure where they stood. And so that you need to really get good at figuring out, what are they afraid of? And how am I going to, if I know what they're afraid of, how can I communicate in a way that doesn't sound like I'm, forcing something down their throat, but is acknowledging their fears and giving them some information that would address their fears.
And which lends itself to kind of the source, right? It's the fear, but also if you continue to excavate that more, to uncover the sources of well-organized and sophisticated, highly targeted misinformation, that really undermines a lot of the process and much of the efforts, well, as best as it can. We've seen that at the multilateral level. We've seen that in the Global Compact for refugees and migrants. What can we collectively do to kind of stem this highly organized disinformation campaigns? I mean, we all need to start to look at identifying those sources and almost being rather surgical with that. What's some advice you could share that would help in that cause?
Well, it was so interesting to see in the vaccine disinformation space, there were findings that there were only really about 12 super producers and spreaders. So it's a really small number of people, but that they were so savvy and powerful that, you know, their messaging that was going out on social media channels was reaching all corners of the earth. And so, but it's helpful to know, as you said, you know, that they're, you know, what is the source? And certainly it's helpful for the social media platforms to know who are the spreaders, who, you know, facilitate the circulation and the perpetuation. Most of them, they pop up in other, but it's good to know, absolutely. That's really for the platforms. I think it's for the public health institutions, for the civil society organizations, for the UN, to be that alternative source of information, to invest in communications, to be as or even, you know, more engaging, to be in those spaces where this misinformation and disinformation is traveling, and not just think you can put up a document static on your website and be passive and people are actively going to come and try to find it. It doesn't work that way in this world anymore.
And that misinformation, of course, I mean, every effort needs to be made, I mean, collectively, and us to really, I think what you're also saying is that we need to be conscientious about that and be aware of that and be proactive about seeking it out and trying to stem it in ways that we can through communication, but also through collaboration. And speaking of collaboration, we're in the Secretary General has coined the term network multilateralism, and he many times he's spoken about what that really means, coming to the bare essence of new forms of collaboration and collective action and inclusivity. What is one thing you see as essential to ensure that the future of multilateralism is inclusive, more interconnected, so we can build back better?
I think it was already kind of sourced in your question, and that is that multilateralism can't just be at the top level. It has to be. One has to, but actively pull in other walks of society and regularly and have them sitting at the table, because multilateralism doesn't. I think everybody kind of thinks it's just between governments, but it isn't. It's with academics like you. It's with women's groups, or climate activists, youth groups, indigenous people. It is about getting voices at the table that are representative of not just societies within nations, but people across the world. So that's, and there are so many linkages between these groups. When I say like women and youth and indigenous and climate, you have them at the global level, and you also have them at the national level and at the community level. So yes, if we're not inclusive, we're not relevant. And if we're not relevant, then we're not going to have much impact.
And you mentioned academics. I mean, the ACUNS itself exists to promote dialogue and understanding on the work of the UN and advocate on the issues and continue to convene and connect and through those avenues of research, exploration, and discovery, which hopefully will continue to serve as one of many forums and instruments to continue to promote that multilateralism and that exchange from knowledge to know-how and beyond.
I can't even tell you how important this is to us. And I think it's still, there's a lot more tapping to do among the academic community, but we really appreciate the work that you do, the convening and the educating and the linkages to the UN, because also, you represent the thinking, the depth and the vision that is also needed for a better world.
Thank you. Melissa, on behalf of ACUNS, really want to thank you very much for your time and sharing with us today the issues and challenges, but also opportunities. The ocean of all of these combined together really have no shore, but we will continue to elevate the ideas, exchange on the matters, and look at ways to continue to connect and bring those issues to the fore of discussion, which is also one of the main objectives of the annual meeting, to bring many of this diverse group of academics, scholars, practitioners, UN officials, non-UN, from diverse backgrounds, as well as the ACUNS board that itself represents that diversity. So thank you very much for your time, and it was delightful to speak with you. And we wish you and our UN colleagues much success for this year. And we will continue to support those messages and those conversations going forward.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and it's great to have this time to go into depth. And I wish everyone at this conference all the best. And thank you very much also for your interest and your engagement in the UN and our work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.